The US coastline looks prominent on a map. It isn't. Right now, cities are flooding without storms, land is sinking without earthquake, and entire sections of coastline are vanishing in ways that don't make the news until it's too late. Here's where it's happening and why. Miami, Florida. Miami sits only a few meters above sea level. That's not unusual for a coastal city. What is unusual is what's underneath it. Most coastal cities are built on a solid bedrock. Miami is built on a porous limestone, a rock riddled with tiny holes and channels. Water doesn't just approach Miami from the ocean, it moves through the ground. As sea levels rise along the Atlantic coast, salt water pushes inland, not only across the shoreline, but underneath the city itself. It seeps up through the storm drains, it pools on the streets, it floods sidewalks and parking lots on clear, sunny days with no rain in the forecast. That's not a metaphor, it's called sunny day flooding and it's exactly what it sounds like. Neighborhoods like Miami Beach have it worse. To fight back, the city has installed pumps, raised roads, and redesigned drainage system, engineering solution for a geology problem. The underlying limestone doesn't change, the water still finds a way. Unlike cities where seawalls keep the ocean out, Miami can't wall off the ground beneath it. Water rising through the ground is one problem. The next city has a different problem. The land is already below the water and is trying to keep out. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans is near the massive Mississippi River, connected to the Gulf. On the map, it looks like every other coastal city. In reality, large parts of it already sit below sea level. The land here is Mississippi Delta, soft sediment deposited over thousands of years, not solid rock. The ground compacts, it sinks, and meanwhile the city is surrounded on nearly every side. The Gulf to the south, the Mississippi carving around the city like a slow, deliberate threat. The only thing standing between New Orleans and the water is an extensive system of levees, flood walls, and pumps running constantly to move water out. Without them, much of the city would flood naturally, not during a hurricane, just on a regular Tuesday. Hurricane Katrina demonstrated this when levee failures allowed water to flood large portions of the city. Entire neighborhoods were submerged for weeks. That wasn't a freak event, it was the system failing to do what it does every single day. The situation keeps getting worse, the land continues to subside, sea levels in the Gulf keep rising. Every year, that combination increases pressure on the levee system. In some neighborhoods, the ground has already dropped several feet compared to historic levels. New Orleans is still a living city, it just requires constant, expensive, non-stop engineering to stay that way. That's not a permanent solution, that's a holding pattern. Now compare that to somewhere the land doesn't sink, it just disappears. The Outer Banks, North Carolina, off the eastern coast of the US, stretching into the Atlantic, sits a thin chain of barrier islands called the Outer Banks. They look like a protective buffer between the mainland and the open ocean. They're not protecting anything, they're barely holding themselves together. The Outer Banks aren't built on a solid ground, they're made almost entirely of sand, shaped and reshaped constantly by currents, wind, and storms. Barrier islands don't stay in place, they shift, they change shape, sometimes they break apart entirely. During major storms, entire sections can disappear in hours. Hurricanes have cut the new inlet straight through the island, splitting roads and isolating communities. During Hurricane Irene, a new inlet opened across Pea Island and destroyed part of the main highway. The road one day, gone the next. And that's just a dramatic version. Even without the storms, the erosion is constant. Waves pull sand from the ocean side, wind redistributes it. Some areas lose several meters of land every year. Communities like Knox Head have already watched homes collapse into the ocean as the shoreline retreats. There are no seawalls tall enough to fix this. No bedrock to anchor to. The Outer Banks exist because sand keeps moving, which is also exactly why they can vanish. Real One, subscribe, you've been here long enough to know what to do. The Outer Banks are visible on the map today, parts of them won't be for long. Islands made of sand move by nature, but farther south the land isn't just moving, it's been erased. Coastal Louisiana, where the Mississippi River meets the Gulf of Mexico, sits one of the fastest disappearing coastlines on Earth. Coastal Louisiana. On the map, wide delta, wetlands, marshes, small islands. In reality, shrinking. For thousands of years, the Mississippi built this place. Every flood deposited sediment, slowly expanding the coastline outward. The river was constantly rebuilding what the Gulf was constantly wearing away. Then, over the past century, levees were built along the river to control flooding. They worked. They also stopped the sediment from spreading into surrounding wetlands. And instead of rebuilding the land, the river now carries that material straight into the Gulf and dumps it in deep water where it's useless. The land that's already there is sinking. The soft delta soil compacts over time. Subsidence, same as New Orleans, and with sea levels rising, the marshes drop lower and lower relative to the ocean. Storms accelerated, hurricanes push water inland, eroding wetlands and breaking apart the barrier islands that used to absorb the damage. In some parts of Louisiana, entire communities that once stood on solid ground are now surrounded by open water. Scientists estimated Louisiana was losing land at a rate equivalent to a football field every hour during certain periods. One of the largest land building systems in North America has reversed direction. The ocean is reclaiming what the river spent thousands of years creating. Louisiana is still on the map, its coastline is losing the argument. That's the Gulf Coast, dramatic and visible. On the East Coast, the same thing is happening, just quieter. The Chesapeake Bay, Maryland and Virginia. Between Maryland and Virginia sits the Chesapeake Bay, a vast estuary where rivers meet the Atlantic. On the map, it looks calm, stable. Islands and coastal communities spread along the edges. The land is sinking beneath them. This isn't just erosion. The Chesapeake area is affected by geological processes going back to the last ice age. Thousands of years ago, massive ice sheets covered parts of North America and pushed the land down. Areas to the south, including the Chesapeake region, were pushed slightly upward as a counterbalance. When the ice melted, that balance reversed. The land has been slowly settling downward ever since. Add rising sea levels along the Atlantic coast, and you get one of the fastest rates of relative sea level rise on the entire East Coast. The effects are clearest on the small islands inside the bay. Danger Island and Smith Island have both lost large portions of their land over the past century. Shorelines are retreating, marshes are becoming open water, roads and buildings that stood safety for generations are now close to water's edge. Storm surges and high tides push it further. These communities still exist. Whether they exist in 50 years is a different question. Around the Chesapeake Bay, the land isn't just being flooded, it's sinking below the water that surrounds it. A sinking coastline is hard to stop, but the next place has a different problem. Some of its land was never supposed to be there. San Francisco Bay Area, California. The San Francisco Bay is one of the largest natural harbors on the Pacific coast, surrounded by San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. Calm on the map, except a significant portion of that shoreline isn't natural. During the 19th and 20th century, large sections of the bay were filled in. Marshes, tidal flats, shallow coastal areas all buried under landfill to create a space for housing, roads, and infrastructure. Entire neighborhoods now sit on ground that was underwater a century ago. Areas like Foster City, parts of Redwood City, and zones along the eastern bay near Alameda are especially exposed. They're low-lying and depend on levees, seawalls, and drainage systems to stay dry. As sea level along the Pacific continue to rise, the bay doesn't need a disaster to reclaim that land. It just needs time and patience. There is already a preview of what's coming. Events called king tides, extreme high tides that occur seasonally, temporarily flood shorelines, bike paths, and roads that should be perfectly dry. Water where there shouldn't be water. Researchers now document these tides as demonstrations of what regular conditions would look like in the future. Natural land adapts, it shifts. Deposit sediment adjusts. Failed ground can't do that. It can't rebuild itself or move upward. It just sits there lower than it used to be, as the bay slowly remembers what it was. The bigger picture. On the map, the United States looks stable, coastlines fixed, cities prominent, regions that seem like they've always been there. They haven't always been there, and some of them won't stay. Across the country, the boundary between land and water keeps moving. The ocean pushes inland, the land sinks, erodes, and breaks apart. It happens slowly enough that most people don't know this until the road floods a little more often. Until the shoreline is a little further back than last year. Until a piece of land that stood for decades starts to disappear. None of these places are gone. The processes shaping them are already running. The map of the United States will not look the same in 100 years. In some of these regions, the line between land and water is already starting to blur. That's where we are. If you made it to the end of this one, you're exactly the kind of person who should subscribe.